The bullet that shattered the window of Clara Lawson's small cabin on that freezing January morning in 1878 was not meant to kill her, but to remind her that she was not welcome in Camp Verde, Arizona territory. She stood frozen, her 6-month-old daughter Grace crying in the wooden cradle nearby, as shards of glass glittered across the rough-hewn floor like scattered stars. The note wrapped around a rock followed seconds later, landing with a heavy thud near her feet. She did not need to read it to know what it said. They all said the same thing: leave or worse would come. Clara bent down slowly, her hands trembling as she picked up her daughter, holding the baby close to her chest. Grace's cries softened against her mother's heartbeat, that eternal rhythm of comfort that seemed to be the only thing Clara could still offer. The baby's father had been a gambler passing through town, a man with silver words and empty promises who had disappeared the moment he learned of her condition. She had been foolish, young, and desperately lonely after her parents died of fever the year before. Now she was 21 years old with a daughter and a reputation that followed her like a shadow through every street, every store, every church door that closed firmly in her face. She walked to the window, careful to avoid the glass, and looked out at the dusty main street of Camp Verde. The town sat in the Verde Valley, surrounded by red rock formations and patches of cottonwood trees that lined the river. It had started as a military outpost and grown into a small community of ranchers, miners, and merchants. It was a hard place for hard people, and Clara had learned quickly that mercy was not among its abundant resources. The general store refused to extend her credit anymore. The church ladies whispered loud enough for her to hear every Sunday when she dared to attend services. Even the local doctor had suggested, in carefully chosen words, that perhaps she would be better suited to life in one of the larger cities where a woman in her circumstances might find more understanding, though they both knew what kind of work he was implying. Clara had nowhere to go, no family to take her in, and barely enough money to survive another month. The small inheritance from her parents had dwindled to almost nothing, spent on basic necessities and the mounting costs of raising a child alone. She heard horses outside and instinctively stepped back from the window, her heart racing. But these riders did not stop at her cabin. They continued down the road toward the center of town, their voices carrying on the cold morning air. Clara recognized one of them as Samuel Morton, the banker who had refused her last loan request, telling her coldly that the bank could not do business with women of questionable character. She had wanted to throw something at him then, to scream that she was not a character but a person, a mother trying to survive, but she had simply nodded and walked out with what little dignity she could muster. Grace began to fuss again, and Clara realized the baby was hungry. She sat in the old rocking chair her father had made, the one piece of furniture that still felt like home, and began to nurse her daughter. As Grace fed, Clara let herself cry quietly, the tears falling onto the baby's soft blanket. She did not know how much longer she could endure this. The isolation was crushing her spirit day by day, hour by hour. She had tried to be strong, to hold her head high and ignore the stares and whispers, but it was becoming harder to find reasons to keep fighting. A knock at the door made her jump. She quickly wiped her eyes and adjusted her dress, settling Grace into the cradle before approaching the door cautiously. "Who is it?" "Name's Jack Obrien, madam. I am here about the ranch hand position." The voice was deep, respectful, clearly belonging to someone who did not know her story yet. Clara frowned. "I think you have the wrong house. I did not advertise for any position." There was a pause. "Apologies, madam. I was told the Lawson place needed help with some repairs and such. Fellow at the saloon mentioned it. If I am mistaken, I will be on my way." Clara's mind raced. She had mentioned to the shopkeeper's wife weeks ago, back when the woman still spoke to her, that she needed someone to fix the leaning fence and the damaged roof before winter truly set in. But that was before her situation became common knowledge, before the invitations stopped and the cold shoulders began. She opened the door a crack, peering out at the stranger. He was tall, probably in his mid-20s, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water in summer. He wore typical cowboy attire, well-worn but clean, and held his hat respectfully in his hands. His horse, a sturdy-looking chestnut mare, stood patiently behind him. There was something about his face that suggested he had seen his share of hard times but had not let them make him cruel. "I appreciate the offer, mister, but I cannot afford to hire anyone right now," Clara said, hating how her voice betrayed her exhaustion. Jack glanced at the broken window, then back at her face. If he noticed the tears she had not quite managed to wipe away, he did not comment. "Madam, I am not looking for much. Just pass through and could use a place to stable my horse for a few days, maybe earn a hot meal or two. I am good with my hands, if you will pardon the expression. That window needs fixing before nightfall, and I noticed your fence is about ready to give up entirely. Why would you help me?" The question came out sharper than she intended, born of too many months of suspicion and hurt. He met her eyes steadily. "Because it looks like you need help, and I was raised to offer it when I could." Clara wanted to believe him, but trust had become a foreign concept. "The people in this town will tell you things about me. I expect they tell things about everybody. Small towns are like that." He shifted his weight, still holding his hat. "I do not make a habit of listening to gossip, madam. I prefer to judge people by what I see with my own eyes." Before Clara could respond, Grace began crying in earnest, the hungry wails of a baby who had not finished feeding. Jack's expression softened immediately. "You have got a little one. All the more reason to get that window fixed quickly. Cannot have the cold getting in." Something in Clara's chest cracked open just a little. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the genuine kindness in this stranger's face, but she found herself nodding. "There is a small shed out back where you can stable your horse. I can offer you supper tonight if you can truly fix that window." "Yes, madam, I can do that." He put his hat back on and tipped it to her. "I will get started right away." Clara closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. She did not know if she had just made a terrible mistake or if Providence had finally decided to show her a kindness. Grace's cries pulled her back to the present, and she returned to the rocking chair, trying to calm her racing thoughts as she tended to her daughter. Through the window, she watched Jack Obrien lead his horse around to the back of the cabin. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, someone who knew his capabilities and did not feel the need to prove them. She realized she had not asked him where he came from or where he was going, basic questions anyone should ask a stranger. But there had been something in his eyes, a steadiness that made her want to trust him despite every lesson the past months had taught her about trusting anyone. Jack worked through the morning, and Clara tried to focus on her own tasks, though she found herself glancing out the window more often than necessary. He had found some old boards in her shed and was carefully measuring them to fit the broken window. His movements were efficient, practiced, the work of someone who had done this kind of labor many times before. When Grace fell asleep for her midday nap, Clara ventured outside with a cup of water. "Thought you might be thirsty," she said, approaching cautiously. Jack straightened up from his work and accepted the cup with a grateful nod. "Much obliged, madam. This Arizona sun is something else, even in January. You are not from around here, then?" "Texas originally, but I have not been back there in years." "Been moving around mostly. working ranches from New Mexico to California. He drank deeply, then handed the cup back. Camp Verde seems like a decent enough town. Clara could not help the bitter laugh that escaped. It can be for some people. Jack looked at her thoughtfully but did not press. The window should be fixed within the hour. After that, if you are still agreeable, I would like to take a look at that fence and the roof. Might take a couple days for the bigger repairs. I told you, I cannot pay much. I can offer meals and the shed for shelter, but that is about all. That is all I am asking for, madam. Clara studied him, trying to understand his angle. In her experience, men always wanted something, always had an ulterior motive. Why are you really here, Mr. Obrien? He set down the tools he was holding and met her gaze directly. Because I was in the saloon this morning getting breakfast, and I heard some men talking about a woman living alone with a baby, about how she was not fit to be in decent society. I heard them laughing about scaring you, about making your life difficult enough that you would leave. And I thought to myself that anyone those particular men wanted gone was probably someone worth helping. The honesty of his answer left Clara momentarily speechless. You do not even know me. No, madam, I do not. But I know men like that, and I generally find myself on the opposite side from them in most matters. They will make your life difficult too if you help me. Jack shrugged and picked up his tools again. I've had a difficult life before. I reckon I can handle it. He returned to his work, and Clara went back inside, her mind whirling. She prepared a simple stew for dinner, using the last of her vegetables and a bit of salt pork she had been rationing. It was not much, but it was warm and filling. As she worked, she found herself humming softly, something she had not done in months. Grace woke happy and content, cooing from her cradle, and for a moment the cabin felt almost peaceful. True to his word, Jack had the window repaired before sunset. He had even swept up all the glass, disposing of it carefully so there was no danger of it hurting anyone. When Clara called him in for supper, he washed up at the pump outside and entered the cabin respectfully, removing his hat and waiting to be told where to sit. The meal was quiet at first, both of them uncertain of what to say. Grace was awake, lying on a blanket near the fire, watching the flames with wide eyes. Jack kept glancing at the baby, his expression soft. How old is she? He asked finally. 6 months. Her name is Grace. That is a good name. She is beautiful. Clara felt unexpected tears prick her eyes at the simple compliment. No one had said anything kind about Grace since she was born. Most people acted as if the baby was ashamed to be hidden away, evidence of Clara's supposed moral failing. Thank you. May I ask where her father is? You can tell me, it is none of my business if you prefer. He is gone. He was not interested in being a father. Clara surprised herself with her honesty. Maybe it was because Jack was a stranger, someone who would likely move on soon and take her secrets with him. Jack nodded slowly, his jaw tightening slightly. Then he is a fool, if you do not mind me saying so. They continued eating, and gradually the conversation became easier. Jack told her about some of the places he had been, the ranches he had worked on, the characters he had met along the way. He had a way of telling stories that made her smile, something she had almost forgotten how to do. In turn, she told him a little about her parents, about how they had come to Arizona Territory hoping to start a small ranch, but had died before they could realize their dream. That is why you are still here, Jack said, understanding dawning in his eyes. This place is all you have left of them. Yes, but I do not know how much longer I can hold on to it. The bank wants to foreclose. The town wants me gone. I am running out of options. Jack was quiet for a moment, his brow furrowed in thought. How much land do you have? About 40 acres plus the cabin. There is a small creek that runs through the property. My father thought it would be perfect for cattle. It would be, Jack agreed. With some work, this could be a fine little ranch, Clara laughed sadly. That would require money I do not have and help I cannot afford. What if you had help? Someone willing to work the land in exchange for a share of the profits. She looked at him suspiciously. Why would you do that? Jack leaned back in his chair, his expression serious. I have been drifting for a long time, madam, working other people's ranches, following other people's orders. I have been saving my wages, thinking someday I might have enough to start my own place. But land is expensive, and what I have saved would not get me much. If you were willing, we could be partners. I would do the work, help get this place running, and we split whatever profit comes from it. People would talk. They already are talking. Clara could not argue with that. This is crazy. You do not know anything about me. I could be exactly what they say I am. And what do they say you are? A whore. A woman of loose morals who trapped a good man and drove him away with her demands. Jack's expression hardened. Is any of that true? No. But the truth does not seem to matter much. It matters to me. He leaned forward, his eyes earnest. Look, I understand if you think this is too fast, too strange. I can finish the repairs I promised and move on if that is what you want. But I am making the offer in good faith, madam. I think we could help each other. Clara looked down at Grace, who had fallen asleep on her blanket, tiny fists curled near her face. Everything in her wanted to say no, to protect herself and her daughter from further disappointment. But what protection could she really offer if they lost the cabin, if they ended up on the street or worse? Can I think about it? Of course. I will be here another day or two at least, working on those repairs. You take all the time you need. That night, after Jack had retired to the shed and Grace was sleeping peacefully in her cradle, Clara sat by the fire and tried to think clearly. The offer was unprecedented, possibly improper, and definitely risky. But it was also the only real option she had been presented in months. She thought about her father, about how he had always been a good judge of character. He would have liked Jack, she thought. He would have appreciated the young man's straightforward manner and strong work ethic. The next morning, Clara woke to the sound of hammering. She looked out to see Jack already up on the roof, working on the damaged section. He had apparently started at first light, wanting to make the most of the cooler morning hours. Grace woke shortly after, and Clara fell into their morning routine of feeding and changing, but her mind kept drifting to the decision she needed to make. Around mid-morning, 3 women from town appeared on the road leading to her cabin. Clara recognized them immediately. Mrs. Sarah Winters, the banker's wife, Mrs. Dorothy Fletcher, who ran the boarding house, and Mrs. Margaret Sullivan, the preacher's wife. Her stomach clenched. These women had been among her mother's friends once, but they had turned their backs on Clara the moment her pregnancy became visible. She watched them approach, their faces set in expressions of grim determination. Jack had climbed down from the roof and was watching the women as well, his posture alert but not aggressive. Clara took a deep breath and stepped outside to meet them, closing the door firmly behind her so they would not see inside her home. Clara Lawson, Mrs. Winters said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. We have come to talk some sense into you. Good morning, ladies. What can I do for you? Clara kept her voice steady, refusing to show fear. Mrs. Fletcher glanced at Jack with obvious disapproval. We heard you have taken up with another man already. Have you no shame at all? Mr. Obrien is doing some repairs on my property. There is nothing improper about it. A single woman alone with a man. How can you say there is nothing improper? Mrs. Sullivan clutched her Bible to her chest like a shield. You have already proven yourself to be morally weak. You intend to continue down this sinful path. Clara felt her face flush with anger and humiliation. My private affairs are none of your concern. They are very much our concern when you insist on remaining in our community, Mrs. Winters stepped closer, lowering her voice. "We have tried to be patient, Clara. We understand you made a mistake. But the decent thing would be to remove yourself and your child from Camp Verde. You are setting a terrible example for the young women of this town." "I have done nothing wrong," Clara said, her voice shaking now. "I am trying to raise my daughter and survive. That is all." "You spread your legs for a man outside of marriage and bore his bastard child," Mrs. Fletcher hissed. "That is not nothing wrong. That is everything wrong." Jack moved then, stepping between Clara and the three women. His voice was quiet but carried an edge of steel. "I think you ladies should leave now." Mrs. Winters looked him up and down with contempt. "And who are you to tell us what to do, Cowboy? Another drifter looking to take advantage of easy virtue." "I am someone who does not take kindly to three women ganging up on one, especially when that one is holding herself with more dignity than all three of you combined." Jack's jaw was tight. "Miss Lawson has been nothing but respectful to you, and you repay her with cruelty." "That tells me everything I need to know about your character, not hers." "How dare you?" Mrs. Sullivan gasped. "We are pillars of this community." "Then maybe the community is built on the wrong foundation." Jack crossed his arms. "Now, like I said, I think it is time for you to leave." The women exchanged shocked glances, clearly not accustomed to being dismissed so firmly. Mrs. Winters recovered first, drawing herself up with indignation. "This is not over, Clara. The bank has options. So does the town council. You would do well to remember that." They turned and walked away, their backs rigid with offense. Clara watched them go, feeling both grateful and terrified. "You should not have done that. They will make trouble for both of us now." Jack shrugged. "They were already making trouble. At least now they know you have someone on your side." Clara looked up at him, this stranger who had appeared in her life less than 24 hours ago and was already defending her against the town's most influential women. "Why are you doing this? Really?" He was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. "My mother was in a situation similar to yours once. I was about 5 years old when my father died in a ranch accident. She tried to keep going to raise me alone, but the town we lived in made it impossible. They accused her of all kinds of things, spread rumors that she was entertaining men for money, that I was not really my father's son. It was all lies, but it did not matter. We had to leave everything behind and start over somewhere new." He focused back on Clara. "I watched what that kind of treatment did to her, how it broke her spirit. I swore I would never stand by and watch it happen to someone else if I could help it." Clara felt tears streaming down her face before she realized she was crying. "I am sorry about your mother. She survived. We both did, and you will too." He said it with such certainty that Clara almost believed him. That afternoon, while Jack continued working on the roof, Clara sat with Grace and thought about everything that had happened. The visit from the church ladies had shaken her, but it had also clarified something. She could not keep going as she had been, isolated and barely surviving. She needed help, and Jack was offering it without asking for anything unreasonable in return. Yes, people would talk. But they were already talking. What did she really have to lose? When Jack came down for water, Clara made her decision. "I accept your offer, the partnership, if you are truly serious about it." Jack's face broke into a genuine smile, the first she had seen from him. It transformed his features, making him look younger and less careworn. "I am serious, madam. We will need to draw up papers, make it legal and proper. I can ride into Prescott tomorrow, find a lawyer to draft something up." "That is not necessary. I trust your word." "Maybe so, but I want this done right, for your protection and mine. If we are going to be partners, we need everything clear and documented." He paused, then added, "There is one other thing. If we are working this land together, living on the same property, people are going to talk even more. Your reputation, such as it is, might take another hit, Clara laughed bitterly. I do not think my reputation can sink much lower. Even so, I want you to understand what you are agreeing to. This will not be easy. Nothing about my life has been easy for a long time. I am used to it. They spent the rest of the afternoon discussing practical matters. Jack had about $300 saved, which he was willing to invest in supplies and livestock. Clara had maybe $50 left from her inheritance. It was not much, but it was a start. They would need to fence the property properly, build a small barn, and acquire some cattle. Jack estimated it would take several months of hard work before they saw any real return on their investment. I will sleep in the shed, Jack said firmly when they discussed living arrangements. We will keep everything proper. No reason to give the gossips more ammunition than they already have. Clara nodded, appreciating his thoughtfulness even as she recognized the futility of trying to protect her reputation at this point. Grace and I will stay in the cabin. But you should at least take your meals with us. It would be foolish to maintain separate kitchens when we are partners. Agreed. Over the following days, a routine began to establish itself. Jack would rise before dawn and work until the heat of midday forced a break. Clara would prepare meals and tend to Grace, but she also began helping where she could, holding tools or offering an extra pair of hands when needed. In the evenings, after supper, they would sit on the porch and talk about their plans for the ranch, or Jack would tell stories that made her laugh. Or sometimes they would just sit in comfortable silence while Grace played on a blanket at their feet. The town's reaction to their partnership was predictably harsh. When Jack rode into Camp Verde to buy supplies, he faced cold stares and hostile murmurs. The general store owner refused to sell to him at first, until Jack calmly explained that his money was as good as anyone else's, and he would appreciate service without the sermon. The owner grudgingly complied, but charged prices that were noticeably higher than what he quoted other customers. They charged you extra, Clara said when Jack returned and showed her the receipts. I figured they might. We will have to be careful with our money, make it stretch as far as possible. Maybe in time, when we have some success, they will treat us fairer. Or maybe we will just take our business elsewhere. The nearest town is a day's ride. Then we will make a day's ride when we need to. I am not going to let them cheat us just because they think they can. Clara found herself admiring his stubborn pride, so different from her own tendency to shrink away from conflict. Jack did not go looking for trouble, but he did not back down from it either. It was a balance she was trying to learn. One evening, about 2 weeks after Jack had arrived, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset paint the red rocks in shades of orange and purple. Grace was dozing in Clara's arms, full and content after nursing. The air was cool but not cold, carrying the scent of mesquite and creosote from the desert. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said quietly. "Of course." "Why have you never settled down before? You are good at this work and you clearly have the skill to run your own place. What kept you moving?" Jack was silent for a long moment, his eyes on the horizon. "I suppose I was always looking for something, though I could not tell you what. After my mother died when I was 17, I just started drifting. Worked my way across the territories, learned everything I could about ranching and horses and surviving in hard country. But I never felt like I belonged anywhere, never felt like I had found the place I was meant to be. And now—" He turned to look at her, and there was something in his expression that made her breath catch. "Now I think maybe I was just waiting to find the right reason to stay put." Clara felt her heart beat faster. She was acutely aware of how close they were sitting, how the fading light made his eyes look like amber. "Jack, Grace stirred and whimpered, breaking the moment. Clara automatically began rocking the baby, and Jack cleared his throat, looking away. "I should check on the mare before it gets full dark. I think she might have picked up a stone in her hoof earlier." He stood and walked toward the shed, and Clara watched him go, her emotions in turmoil. She had been alone so long, had armored her heart so thoroughly against further hurt, that she barely recognized the feelings stirring inside her. But they were there, undeniable and growing stronger each day. She was falling for Jack Obrien, this kind stranger who had ridden into her life and offered help when everyone else had offered only judgment. The realization terrified her. She had trusted a man before and been left alone and pregnant for her faith. How could she be sure Jack would not do the same? He had given her no reason to doubt him, had been nothing but honest and hardworking and respectful. But fear was not logical, and her fear ran deep. That night, Clara lay awake in her small bed, Grace sleeping peacefully in the cradle nearby. Through the window, she could see the lamp burning in the shed where Jack was presumably getting ready for sleep. She wondered if he was thinking about her, if he had felt the same charged moment she had on the porch. The thought made her feel warm all over, a sensation she had not experienced since before Grace was born, maybe even before that. The next morning, there was a slight awkwardness between them that had not been there before. Both of them seemed careful not to stand too close, not to let their hands touch when passing tools or dishes. Clara hated it, hated how that beautiful moment of connection had somehow created this distance. But she did not know how to bridge it without revealing feelings she was not sure she should be having. Jack worked on building a proper corral that day, using wood he had bought in town. It was hot work, even in January, and by midday his shirt was damp with sweat. Clara brought him water and watched as he drank deeply, the muscles in his throat working. When he lowered the cup and caught her staring, she felt her face flush and quickly looked away. "Clara," he said softly, "we need to talk." Her stomach dropped. This was it. He was going to tell her he had changed his mind, that this partnership was not going to work. "All right." Jack set down the cup and wiped his hands on his pants. "I have been thinking about what almost happened last night on the porch, and I think I need to be straight with you about something." "Go on." "I like you. More than I probably should, given how short a time we have known each other. I find myself looking forward to our evenings together, to talking with you, to seeing you smile when something I say amuses you. I think you are brave and strong and beautiful, and Grace is lucky to have you as her mother." He took a breath. "But I do not want to complicate things. You have been through enough without me adding more trouble to your life. So if you want me to keep my distance, just say so. I will respect that. We can be partners and nothing more if that is what you need." Clara stared at him, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. "And if I do not want you to keep your distance," his eyes widened slightly, "then I would need to know what you do want." "I want to stop being afraid," she said, the words rushing out before she could stop them. "I want to stop looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next bad thing to happen. I want to believe that maybe something good can come into my life and actually stay. I want." She trailed off, overwhelmed by the intensity of what she was feeling. Jack stepped closer slowly, giving her time to back away if she wanted. When she did not move, he reached out and gently cupped her face in his calloused hand. "I am not him. I am not the man who left you. If I make a promise, I keep it. If I commit to something, I see it through. Do you understand? I want to. Then let me prove it to you. Let me show you that not all men are liars and cheaters. Give me that chance." Clara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. "I am scared. I know, so am I. But I think maybe we can be scared together." When she opened her eyes, he was looking at her with such tenderness that it made her chest ache. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to refuse, Jack leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle, tentative, asking rather than demanding. Clara felt something inside her crack wide open, all the loneliness and fear spilling out to be replaced by hope and warmth and the thrilling possibility of happiness. They pulled apart slowly, and Jack rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to court you properly. Whatever the town says, whatever trouble comes, I want to do this right. You deserve that. People will say terrible things. Let them. I do not care about their opinions. They will say you are taking advantage of me, or I am trapping you, or any number of cruel things." Jack pulled back enough to look into her eyes. "The only opinion that matters to me is yours, and Grace's when she is old enough to have one." At the mention of her daughter, Clara felt a fresh wave of emotion. "You really do not mind that I have a child?" "Mind, Clara, Grace is part of you." "How could I mind something that is part of the woman I am falling in love with?" He said it so simply, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "You are falling in love with me." The words came out as barely a whisper. "Yes. I think I have been since that first day when you opened the door looking like you were ready to face down the whole world with nothing but your pride and determination. I looked at you and thought, there is a woman worth knowing, worth staying for." Clara felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in so long they were happy tears. "I am falling in love with you too. It terrifies me, but I am." They kissed again, longer this time with more certainty. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling. Grace began crying from inside the cabin, her timing impeccable as always. Clara laughed, wiping her eyes. "I should go to her. I will finish the corral. But Clara, tonight after supper we are going to sit on that porch again, and I am going to hold your hand like a proper suitor. And anyone who has a problem with it can take it up with me." She smiled, feeling lighter than she had in a year. "I would like that." The days that followed were among the happiest Clara could remember. True to his word, Jack courted her with old-fashioned propriety, asking permission before kissing her, keeping his hands respectful, maintaining his residence in the shed even though they both knew the town assumed the worst anyway. He began to teach her about ranching, showing her how to mend fences and judge the quality of cattle and 100 other skills she would need. More importantly, Jack formed a bond with Grace that made Clara's heart swell every time she witnessed it. He would talk to the baby while he worked, explaining what he was doing in a gentle voice that made Grace coo with delight. He carved her a little wooden rattle and presented it with the solemnity of a knight offering a treasure. And one evening, when Grace was fussy and Clara was exhausted from a long day, Jack asked if he could try to settle her. Clara watched, amazed, as Jack walked the floor with her daughter, humming a tuneless melody and gently patting her back. Within minutes, Grace was calm, her head resting on his shoulder, her eyes drooping closed. When he laid her carefully in the cradle and turned around, he found Clara watching with tears in her eyes. "What is wrong?" he asked, concerned. "Nothing is wrong. Everything is right. It is just that no one has ever helped me with her before. I have been doing it all alone for so long." Jack crossed to her and pulled her into his arms. "You are not alone anymore. You have me, and I am not going anywhere." About 3 weeks after their first kiss, Jack rode into Prescott to meet with a lawyer about formalizing their partnership. He also stopped at a jeweler, though he did not mention that to Clara. When he returned 2 days later, Clara greeted him with such obvious relief and happiness that it confirmed everything he already knew in his heart. This was where he belonged. This was home. That evening, after Grace was asleep, and they were sitting on the porch as had become their custom, Jack took Clara's hand. "I saw the lawyer. He drafted up partnership papers that split everything 50-50, all legal and proper. We just need to sign them in front of a witness." "Thank you for doing that, for making sure everything is clear." There is something else I want to make clear." Jack took a deep breath, suddenly nervous in a way he had not been since he was a boy. "Clara Lawson, I know we have not known each other long, just over a month if you count by days. But I have learned more about you in that month than I have learned about most people in years. I know you are strong and brave and kind. I know you put Grace's needs before your own without even thinking about it. I know you hum when you are cooking and you bite your lip when you are concentrating on something difficult. I know the sound of your laugh is my favorite sound in the world." Clara's eyes were wide, her breath coming faster. "Jack, what are you saying?" He slid off his chair and knelt on one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket. "I am saying that I love you. I am saying that I want to be Grace's father in every way that matters. I am saying that I want to build this ranch with you, not as partners but as husband and wife. Clara Lawson, will you marry me?" He opened the box to reveal a simple silver band with a small turquoise stone set in it. It was not expensive or elaborate, but it was beautiful in its simplicity, reflecting the desert sky that surrounded them. Clara was crying again, her hand pressed to her mouth. "Yes, yes, of course I will marry you." Jack slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. He stood and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with all the love and promise and hope he felt. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools. "The town is going to lose their minds," Clara said, laughing through her tears. "Let them. We will have the preacher marry us, do it in the church if he will allow it, or in this very spot if he will not. Either way, we will do it right and proper so no one can say otherwise. The preacher will not marry us. His wife is one of the women who came here to run me off." Jack's jaw set stubbornly. "Then we will find someone who will. There has to be a judge or a justice of the peace somewhere who is not in the pocket of those spiteful church ladies." As it turned out, they did not have to look far. When Jack rode into Camp Verde the next day to post a notice of their intent to marry, as required by law, he encountered an old man sitting outside the general store. The man introduced himself as Judge Henry Thornton, recently retired from the territorial court and living with his daughter in town. When Jack explained his situation, the judge's weathered face broke into a knowing smile. "So you are the cowboy who has been helping Clara Lawson. I have heard about you. Most of it uncomplimentary, I am afraid." "I expect so, sir." "Well, I have also seen how the good people of this town have treated that young woman, and I find it disgraceful. Christian charity seems to be in short supply around here these days." The judge stood, leaning on his cane. "I would be honored to perform your marriage ceremony, son. You tell me when and where, and I will be there." "Thank you, sir. That means more than you know. One piece of advice, though, make it soon. Do not give the busybodies time to organize opposition. These small towns can be surprisingly creative when they want to make trouble." Jack took the advice to heart. 3 days later, on a clear February morning in 1878, Clara Lawson and Jack Obrien were married in the yard of their ranch, with Judge Thornton presiding. The only witnesses were the judge's daughter, a kind woman named Elizabeth who had defied her husband's wishes to attend, and a neighboring rancher named Tom McAllister, who had always been decent to Clara even after her situation became known. Clara wore her mother's best dress, altered to fit her. She carried a small bouquet of winter wildflowers that Jack had ridden miles to find. Grace was in her arms, dressed in a little gown that Elizabeth had brought as a wedding gift. When Judge Thornton asked if anyone objected to the union, silence filled the air except for the wind rustling through the cottonwoods and the distant call of a hawk. "Then by the power vested in me by Arizona Territory, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Son, you may kiss your bride." Jack kissed Clara tenderly, carefully, mindful of the baby between them. When they pulled apart, both had tears in their eyes. The small group cheered and Elizabeth hugged them both, whispering to Clara that she deserved happiness and not to let the town's cruelty dim her joy. That night, for the first time, Jack did not sleep in the shed. They put Grace down in her cradle and then stood awkwardly in the cabin that was now their shared home. The reality of their new situation was suddenly very present. "I can sleep on the floor if you want," Jack offered. "Or we can wait until you are ready. There is no rush." Clara looked at this good man, her husband, who was offering her patience and respect even now. She thought about all the lonely nights she had spent in this cabin, all the fear and shame and isolation. She thought about how Jack had given her back her dignity, her hope, her belief that she could be loved. She stepped closer to him and took his hands in hers. "I am ready. I want this. I want you." What followed was tender and careful, with Jack treating her like something precious. He whispered words of love and reassurance, and Clara found herself responding with a passion she had not known she possessed. This was nothing like her experience with Grace's father, that hurried, almost shameful coupling that had left her feeling used and empty. This was beautiful and intimate and right. Afterward, lying in Jack's arms with his heartbeat steady beneath her ear, Clara felt truly safe for the first time in over a year. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too. Both of you." His hand moved to rest gently on her hair. "I meant what I said before. Grace is my daughter now in every way that matters. Tomorrow I am going to the courthouse to start the process of legally adopting her. I want her to have my name." Clara lifted her head to look at him, even though she could barely see his face in the dim light. "You would do that, of course. She is mine from this day forward. I will be the one to teach her to ride and to read and to stand up for what is right. I will be the one to walk her down the aisle someday if some worthy young man ever manages to deserve her. She is my daughter." Clara buried her face in his chest and cried, overwhelmed by the gift he was giving both her and Grace. A father, a family, a future. The next few months were not easy. The town's hostility did not disappear overnight, and there were challenges at every turn. The banker refused to extend them credit for buying cattle, forcing them to make do with the few head they could afford to purchase outright. The general store continued to overcharge them, and several of the town's more prominent citizens made a point of snubbing them publicly. But there were also unexpected allies. Tom McAllister, the neighboring rancher, offered to sell them a small herd at a fair price, accepting payment in installments. Elizabeth Thornton and her father visited regularly, bringing supplies and good conversation. Even a few of the younger people in town, perhaps less rigid in their judgment than their elders, began to treat Jack and Clara with cautious respect. Slowly, painstakingly, the ranch began to take shape. Jack worked from dawn until dusk, and Clara learned to work beside him, developing calluses on her hands and strength in her back. Grace thrived, growing from a tiny infant into a chubby, happy baby who laughed at everything and everyone, especially her father. Jack never called Grace anything but his daughter. When people in town asked about her, he would say proudly, "That is my little girl." If anyone tried to remind him that she was not his by blood, he would fix them with a hard stare and say, "She is mine in every way that counts, and I will thank you not to suggest otherwise." One particularly memorable day, they were in town buying supplies when Samuel Morton, the banker, made a snide comment about the bastard child and her fool of a stepfather. Jack set down the sack of grain he was carrying, walked calmly over to Morton, and said in a voice that carried across the entire store, "That is my daughter you are speaking about, and if I ever hear you use that word in reference to her again, you and I will have a serious problem. Are we clear?" Morton, who was not accustomed to being challenged, sputtered and turned red. "You cannot threaten me." "I am not threatening. I am promising. Now apologize to my wife." The store had gone silent, everyone watching. Morton looked at Clara, who was standing by the door with Grace in her arms, her chin held high despite the color in her cheeks. For a long moment, it seemed he would refuse. But something in Jack's stance, the quiet certainty of a man who meant every word he said, made the banker reconsider. "I apologize, Mrs. Obrien." It was the first time anyone in town had called her by her married name. Clara nodded regally. Apology accepted. They collected their supplies and left, Jack carrying everything with one arm and holding Clara's hand with the other. As they walked back to their wagon, Clara said quietly, "You did not have to do that." "Yes, I did. Grace is my daughter. I will not have anyone speaking about her that way now or ever. People need to understand that." From that day forward, the tone in town began to shift, at least slightly. It was not acceptance, not exactly, but it was a grudging acknowledgement that the Obriens were not going away and were not going to be cowed by gossip and social pressure. Some people remained hostile, particularly the church ladies who had led the initial charge against Clara. But others, seeing Jack's unwavering devotion to his family and their success in building up the ranch, began to soften. Spring came to the Verde Valley, bringing with it new grass for the cattle and longer days for working. Clara discovered she was pregnant again, and Jack's joy at the news was so pure and unrestrained that it made her fall in love with him all over again. He was immediately protective, insisting she not overwork herself, though Clara pointed out she had managed her first pregnancy while essentially alone and could certainly handle this one with a loving husband beside her. "That is exactly the point," Jack said, pulling her close. "You should not have had to handle it alone. This time, you have me." Throughout her pregnancy, Jack was attentive and caring in ways Clara had not imagined possible. He took over more of the heavy work on the ranch, hiring a young man from a neighboring farm to help during the busiest times. He made sure Clara rested in the heat of the day, and never went without whatever food she was craving, even if it meant riding to another town to find it. Grace, now over a year old and toddling around the cabin with increasing confidence, seemed to sense something special was happening. She would pat Clara's growing belly and babble in her baby language, and Jack swore she was saying baby brother, though Clara thought it sounded more like ba ba. In November of 1878, Clara gave birth to a healthy baby boy in the bedroom of their cabin, with Jack holding her hand and the doctor from town, who had finally agreed to treat them after Jack paid double his usual fee, attending to the medical necessities. When the doctor placed the squalling infant in Clara's arms and announced it was a son, Jack bent down and kissed both of them, his face wet with tears. "What should we name him?" Clara asked, exhausted but glowing with happiness. "I was thinking James, if that suits you, after my father." "James Obrien, it is perfect." Jack took the baby carefully, holding his son with practiced ease learned from many months of caring for Grace. "Hello, James. I am your father. And that wonderful woman right there is your mother. And the little whirlwind trying to climb onto the bed is your big sister Grace. You are a lucky boy, because you are born into a family that loves you already." Clara watched him with their son, remembering the broken window and the rock with its hateful message, the church ladies with their cruel words, the long, lonely nights when she thought she would never be happy again. And here she was, less than a year later, with a husband she adored, a beautiful daughter who would never remember being called a bastard because her father made sure she was loved and protected, and now a new son. It seemed impossible that so much could change in such a short time. Over the next few years, the Obrien ranch prospered. Jack's careful management and hard work paid off in the form of a growing herd and a reputation for quality cattle. They built a proper barn and expanded the cabin, adding rooms for the children and a separate bedroom for Clara and Jack. They hired 2 full-time ranch hands and seasonal workers during roundup. The bank, seeing their success, finally agreed to extend them credit, though Jack still preferred to deal with banks in other towns when possible. Grace grew into a bright, spirited little girl with Clara's dark hair and Jack's green eyes, a happy accident of genetics that made everyone who saw them together assume she was his biological child. Jack never corrected them, and neither did Clara. As far as they were concerned, biology was irrelevant. Grace was their daughter in every sense of the word, and she adored her father with all the intensity of a little girl who had never known a moment's doubt about being loved. James was a quieter child, more thoughtful and studious, but he shared his father's solid dependability and gentle nature. By the time he was 3, he was already following Jack around the ranch, wanting to help with everything, his little face serious with concentration as he tried to mimic his father's movements. In the spring of 1881, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Rose, and in 1883, another son they called Daniel. The cabin that had once seemed too large for just Clara and baby Grace was now filled with the noise and chaos and joy of a large family. Jack built additions as needed, joking that at this rate they would soon have a house the size of the church. The town's attitude toward them had slowly transformed as well. It was hard to maintain righteous indignation toward a family that worked hard, paid their debts, attended church regularly, and raised well-mannered children. Some of the older generation still remembered and whispered about Clara's past, but most of the younger folks knew the Obriens only as a respectable ranching family. The church ladies never fully forgave Clara, but they learned to tolerate her presence. When Mrs. Margaret Sullivan's son got into trouble in Prescott and needed money for a lawyer, it was Jack Obrien who lent it to them, interest-free, with only a handshake for security. When Mrs. Dorothy Fletcher's boarding house caught fire, it was the Obrien family who showed up with blankets and food and offers of help rebuilding. Kindness, it turned out, was more powerful than judgment. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Jack surprised Clara with a new ring to go alongside her simple wedding band. This one was gold with 3 small diamonds, representing their 3 eldest children, with room for more stones to be added as their family grew. "You did not have to do this," Clara said, but she was smiling as she slipped it on. "I wanted to. I wanted you to have something beautiful, something that shows the world how much I treasure you." They were sitting on the porch, their favorite spot, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set. Grace, now 5, was carefully helping 3-year-old James build a tower of blocks while baby Rose dozed in a basket nearby. It was an ordinary evening in an ordinary week, but Clara felt such profound contentment that it brought tears to her eyes. "What is wrong?" Jack asked, immediately concerned. "Nothing is wrong. I was just thinking about the day you showed up here, asking about work. If someone had told me then that this would be my life, I would not have believed them. I was so certain I would never be happy again, never be respected again, never be loved." Jack pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "You deserve all of this and more. You are the strongest person I know, Clara. You survived something that would have broken many others, and you came through it with your kindness and your spirit intact. That is remarkable. I could not have done it without you. Sure you could have, but I am glad you did not have to." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, then Jack said, "Grace asked me something yesterday that I wanted to talk to you about. Clara looked at him, noting the seriousness in his expression. What did she ask? She wanted to know why she looks different from James and Rose. She said one of the girls in town told her that she must not be my real daughter because she does not have red in her hair like I do. Clara's heart clenched. What did you tell her? I told her that she is absolutely my real daughter, that I chose to be her father, and that makes it just as real as any other way of becoming one. I told her that families are built on love, not just blood. But she is getting old enough to understand more, and I think she deserves the truth, or at least a version of it she can understand. Clara thought about this, about the story they would eventually need to tell Grace. The little girl had no memory of the time before Jack, no knowledge of the man whose blood ran through her veins. Jack was her father in every way that mattered. But Clara knew from her own experience that secrets had a way of surfacing, and it would be better if Grace heard the truth from them rather than from some malicious gossip in town. You are right, she said finally. When she is a bit older, maybe 7 or 8, we will tell her. We will explain that I loved someone before I met you, and that love gave me her, which was the greatest gift. But that person was not ready to be a father, and then you came along and chose to be, and that makes you her real father in every way that counts. That is good. That is honest without being too much for a child to process. Jack squeezed her hand. We will make sure she knows she is loved and wanted, that she was never a mistake or a shame. Thank you for everything, for loving her the way you do. How could I not? She is ours, Clara. Just as much as James or Rose or any other children we might have. There is no difference in my heart. And that was the truth, Clara knew. Jack loved all their children with the same fierce devotion, the same patient guidance, the same gentle discipline when needed. He never once treated Grace as less than his own, never gave her reason to doubt her place in his heart. As the years continued to pass, the Obrien Ranch became one of the most successful in the Verde Valley. Jack's reputation as a fair employer and a skilled cattleman grew, and he was eventually asked to serve on the Territorial Livestock Association board. Clara, for her part, became known for her hospitality and her work with the local school, donating books and supplies to ensure all the children in the area had access to education. When Grace turned 8, they sat her down and had the conversation they had been preparing for. Clara was nervous, afraid of how their daughter would react to learning that Jack was not her biological father. But Grace listened to their carefully worded explanation, her young face serious, and when they finished, she simply said, "So Papa chose me. He wanted to be my Papa." "Yes," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "I chose you. From the very first moment I saw you, I knew you were meant to be my daughter." Grace thought about this for a moment, then climbed into Jack's lap and hugged him tightly. "I am glad you chose me. You are the best papa in the whole world." Jack held his daughter close, his eyes meeting Clara's over the top of Grace's head. In that moment, Clara knew with absolute certainty that they had done the right thing, that this family they had built from love and determination and hope was exactly what it was meant to be. As the 1880s progressed, the American West was changing rapidly. Railroads connected once remote towns, and the wide open ranges were increasingly being fenced and settled. The days of the wild frontier were fading, replaced by a more civilized but perhaps less adventurous era. Jack sometimes talked about the old days, when he had drifted from place to place with nothing but his horse and his skills to sustain him. But he never spoke of them with longing, only with the mild nostalgia of someone reflecting on a chapter that was complete. "I do not miss it," he told Clara one night. "That life was lonely, even when I did not realize it. I was just going through the motions, existing but not really living. This is living. You, the children, the ranch. This is what I was supposed to find all along. Clara, now in her early 30s and still beautiful despite the lines that years of desert sun and hard work had etched around her eyes, smiled at her husband. I feel the same way. Everything that happened, all the pain and shame and struggle, it brought me to you. So I cannot regret it, even the worst parts. By 1887, the Obrien family had grown to include 6 children. After Daniel had come 2 more daughters, Ruth and Sarah, born in 1885 and 1886, respectively. The cabin had been expanded and renovated so many times it was barely recognizable from the small, damaged structure Jack had first seen. It was now a sprawling ranch house with multiple bedrooms, a large kitchen, and a front porch that wrapped around 2 sides of the building. Grace, now 14, was growing into a beautiful and confident young woman. She had Clara's grace and Jack's steadiness, and she was developing a talent for working with horses that made Jack proud. James, at 12, was already doing the work of a full-grown ranch hand, though Jack made sure the boy still had time for schooling and play. The younger children were a lively, happy bunch, always underfoot and full of questions and laughter. The town of Camp Verde had grown as well, doubling in size and gaining amenities like a proper school, a telegraph office, and even a small library. The people who had once shunned Clara were now her neighbors and, in some cases, her friends. The past was not forgotten, but it had been largely forgiven, or at least set aside in favor of the present reality of a respectable, successful family. One warm evening in June of 1888, the entire Obrien family gathered on their porch for a celebration. Grace had just graduated from the local school, earning top marks and a special commendation from the teacher. Jack had slaughtered a steer, and they had invited neighbors and friends for a barbecue, a gesture of hospitality that would have been unthinkable a decade earlier. Tom McAllister was there with his family, as were Judge Thornton and his daughter Elizabeth. Even a few of the town's more prominent citizens had accepted the invitation, including, to Clara's surprise, Mrs. Margaret Sullivan. The preacher's wife was older now, her hair completely gray, and some of the sharpness had gone out of her features. As the evening wore on and people ate and talked and laughed, Mrs. Sullivan approached Clara, who was cutting pieces of pie for the children. "Mrs. Obrien, might I have a word?" Clara tensed instinctively but kept her voice pleasant. "Of course, Mrs. Sullivan." The older woman looked uncomfortable, her hands twisting in her apron. "I wanted to say that I was wrong. About you, about your situation, about everything. I let my own sense of righteousness cloud my judgment, and I treated you abominably when you needed help and compassion. I am sorry. It is far too late for apologies, I know, but I wanted to say it anyway." Clara was stunned. In all the years since Jack had come into her life, Mrs. Sullivan had never spoken directly to her beyond the barest civilities. "I appreciate you saying that, Mrs. Sullivan, truly. Your family is beautiful. Your children are well raised and kind. Your husband is a good man. You have built something wonderful here, despite everything people like me did to try to tear you down. That speaks to your character, and I was wrong not to see it sooner." "We all make mistakes," Clara said gently. "What matters is that we learn from them." Mrs. Sullivan nodded, tears in her eyes. "You are a better woman than I am, Clara Obrien. Thank you for not turning me away this evening." She walked away before Clara could respond, leaving Clara standing there with a piece of pie forgotten in her hand. Jack appeared at her elbow, having witnessed the exchange from across the yard. "Are you all right?" he asked softly. "I think I am. More than all right, actually. I think that is the final piece, you know, the last bit of the past that needed to be resolved." Jack wrapped his arm around her waist and pulled her close. "You are an amazing woman, Clara Obrien. Have I mentioned that recently?" "Not since this morning," she teased, leaning into his embrace. They stood together, watching their children play with the neighbors' children, watching their guests enjoy the food and fellowship, watching the sun set over the land they had built together through hard work and love and unshakable faith in each other. It was a perfect moment, the kind that stays crystallized in memory forever. As the 1890s began, the Obrien children started to grow up and make their own ways in the world. Grace, at 18, had attracted the attention of several young men in the area, but she was in no hurry to marry. She had watched her parents' love story unfold and knew she wanted something equally real and deep. Jack approved of her selectiveness, though he joked that no man would ever be good enough for his firstborn daughter. James, at 16, was increasingly taking over the day-to-day running of the ranch, freeing Jack to focus on breeding programs and business development. The boy had a natural head for numbers and organization that complemented his father's intuitive understanding of cattle and land management. Together, they made a formidable team. The younger children were finding their own interests and talents. Rose, now 9, loved reading and wanted to become a teacher. Daniel, 7, was fascinated by mechanics and was always taking things apart to see how they worked. Little Ruth and Sarah, at 5 and 4 respectively, were inseparable, two peas in a pod who did everything together. In the spring of 1892, tragedy struck when Judge Thornton passed away peacefully in his sleep. His death hit the Obrien family hard, as the old judge had been a true friend and supporter through the years. Jack served as a pallbearer at the funeral, and Clara made sure Elizabeth, who was now alone in the world, knew she had a family in the Obriens. But even grief could not diminish the fundamental happiness and stability the family had built. They had weathered storms before and would weather them again together. That was the promise Jack and Clara had made to each other, and it was a promise they kept every single day. One evening in late 1893, as Jack and Clara sat on their porch watching yet another spectacular sunset, Clara said, "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been? If you had ridden past that day instead of stopping, if I had turned you away?" Jack considered this seriously. "I think about it sometimes, and then I think about everything I would have missed, and it makes me grateful for every decision that led me here. Even the bad ones, the mistakes and wrong turns, they all pointed me toward you eventually." "I used to be so angry at Grace's father," Clara confessed. "So bitter about how he left me to face everything alone. But I cannot be angry anymore. Because if he had stayed, if he had been the man I thought he was, you would never have become Grace's father. And you are exactly the father she was supposed to have." "I think about him sometimes too," Jack admitted. "I wonder if he knows what he missed out on, what an incredible daughter he has somewhere in the world. And then I think, his loss is my gain, and I am grateful for his cowardice because it gave me the privilege of raising her." They sat in comfortable silence, their hands entwined, until Grace came out onto the porch. At 19, she was the image of Clara, beautiful and strong and kind. "Papa, Mama, I have something to tell you," she said, her voice excited but nervous. "What is it, sweetheart?" Jack asked, immediately attentive. "You know Henry Richardson from the Triple R Ranch?" When they nodded, she continued, "He has asked permission to court me. I wanted to make sure you both approved before I gave him an answer." Jack and Clara exchanged glances. Henry was a good young man, 21 years old, hardworking and respectful. His family ran a successful ranch about 10 miles south, and he had always been polite and proper in his interactions with Grace. "How do you feel about him?" Clara asked. Grace's face softened into a smile. I think I could love him, Mama. He is kind and funny, and he makes me want to be better. He reminds me of Papa in some ways." Jack cleared his throat, clearly emotional. "That is high praise. If he reminds you of me, he must be quite a fellow, so I can tell him yes." "You are a grown woman, Grace. You do not need our permission to be courted," Clara said gently, "but you have our blessing if that is what you are asking for." Grace hugged them both fiercely. "Thank you. I love you both so much." After she had gone back inside, practically dancing with happiness, Jack turned to Clara with mock seriousness. "Our baby is growing up. They all are. Time does not stop, no matter how much we might wish it to. I know, but I am not ready for her to leave us yet." Clara laughed softly. "She is not leaving us. She is just beginning her own story the way we began ours." "I suppose you are right." Jack pulled her close, kissing her temple. "As long as our story continues, I can handle theirs beginning." Grace and Henry courted properly for nearly a year before he proposed in the spring of 1894. The wedding was held on the Obrien Ranch, a beautiful outdoor ceremony that drew people from all over the territory. Grace was a radiant bride and Henry a proud groom, but it was the moment when Jack walked his daughter down the makeshift aisle that made everyone tear up. "I love you, Papa," Grace whispered as they paused before she took Henry's hand. "I love you too, sweetheart. Always have, always will. You are my first daughter, my first blessing. Be happy." "I will. I learned from the best." The celebration that followed was joyous and heartfelt, a community coming together to honor a family that had overcome so much. As Clara watched Jack dance with Grace, his face full of pride and love, she thought about the broken, desperate woman she had been when he first arrived. That woman would never have believed this future was possible, would never have dared to hope for such happiness. But it was real. It was happening. And it was the life they had built together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love and courage at a time. In 1895, Clara gave birth to their seventh and final child, a son they named Thomas. Jack was 42 now, his hair showing threads of silver, and Clara was 38, but they both agreed that their family felt complete. 7 children, a thriving ranch, the respect of their community, and a love that had only deepened and strengthened over the years. They had everything they had ever dreamed of and more. Grace and Henry welcomed their first child, a daughter, in 1896, making Jack and Clara grandparents for the first time. When Jack held his tiny granddaughter, tears streamed unashamedly down his face. "This is Grace's daughter," he said wonderingly to Clara, "our Grace's daughter. When I think about where we started, about what this represents, it overwhelms me." "I know," Clara whispered, her own eyes wet. "Our family, Jack. Look at what we have created." The turn of the century found the Obrien Ranch more successful than ever. James, now 21, had married a local girl and was building a house on the far corner of the property, planning to raise his own family there while continuing to work the ranch with his father. The younger children were growing up strong and healthy and full of promise. Jack and Clara, now in their 40s, had settled into a comfortable rhythm. They still took their evening walks around the property, still sat on the porch and talked about everything and nothing, still laughed and loved and occasionally argued about the small things that long married couples debate. But underneath it all was the bedrock certainty of their commitment to each other and to the family they had built. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1898, Jack surprised Clara by taking her back to the exact spot where they had first met, where he had knocked on her door offering to repair a broken window. The cabin had been incorporated into the larger house, but that original door still stood, now opening into what they used as a library. "I stood right here," Jack said, positioning himself on the porch, "and I heard your voice, so tired and weary, asking who I was. And when you opened this door, I saw a woman who was barely holding herself together, but doing it with such dignity and strength that it took my breath away. I remember, Clara said softly. I saw a stranger who could have been anyone, good or bad, and I was so scared. But there was something in your eyes, some essential kindness that made me take a chance. Best chance either of us ever took. Jack pulled her close, kissing her with the practiced ease of 2 decades of marriage. I love you, Clara Obrien. I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you until my last breath. And I love you. You saved me, Jack. You saved us. No, he said firmly. You saved yourself. You were surviving long before I showed up. I just gave you a reason to do more than survive. I gave you a reason to thrive. They stood together in the fading light, 2 people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of Clara's past and Jack's wandering. Their children were inside, preparing the surprise party they thought was a secret. Their grandchildren were playing in the yard. Their ranch stretched out around them, a testament to hard work and faith and love. It was not the life Clara had planned when she was a young woman. It was not the life Jack had imagined during his years of drifting. But it was the life they had chosen together, and it was perfect in its imperfection, beautiful in its realness, precious beyond measure. As the years continued to pass, the Obrien family remained a cornerstone of the Camp Verde community. Jack served on the town council for several years, using his position to advocate for better schools and improved roads. Clara started a lending library out of their home, making books available to anyone who wanted to borrow them, regardless of their ability to pay. Their children grew up, married, and had children of their own, each generation carrying forward the values of hard work, kindness, and resilience that Jack and Clara had instilled in them. Grace and Henry's family grew to include 4 children, and they remained close to the Obrien ranch, visiting regularly and seeking advice from Jack and Clara. James and his wife had 3 children and took over full management of the ranch when Jack finally decided to retire in 1905. The younger Obrien children scattered across the territory, pursuing their own dreams, but always staying connected to the family that had nurtured them. In the spring of 1910, when Jack was 57 and Clara 53, they celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary with their entire family gathered around them. There were children and grandchildren everywhere, the house full of noise and laughter and love. As Jack looked around at the faces of the people he loved most in the world, he felt a profound sense of gratitude for the path his life had taken. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed and the house was finally quiet, Jack and Clara once again found themselves on their beloved porch, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "You remember what you said to me that first night?" Clara asked. "After I agreed to let you stay and do the repairs," Jack thought back across the decades. "I said a lot of things that first night. You said you preferred to judge people by what you saw with your own eyes, not by what others told you." Clara turned to look at him, her face soft with love. "That simple statement changed my entire life. Because you looked at me and saw someone worth helping, worth knowing, worth loving. You did not see what the town saw. You saw me. I saw a remarkable woman in impossible circumstances, doing her best to protect her child and maintain her dignity. How could I not help? How could I not fall in love? You gave Grace a father when no one else would. You gave me a husband when I thought I was unlovable. You gave us both a future when everyone said we had none. That is not something I will ever be able to repay." Jack took her hand, his thumb tracing the familiar pattern of the veins and bones under her skin. "You have repaid me every single day we have been together. You have given me a home, a family, a purpose. You have given me the greatest gift any person can give another, the gift of being truly known and loved anyway. I am the one who should be grateful." They sat together as the night deepened around them, two people who had built a life from hope and determination, and love that refused to be defeated. The ranch was quiet, the cattle settled for the night, the children and grandchildren sleeping peacefully in their various homes. It was an ordinary night in an extraordinary life, and it was exactly where they were meant to be. Years later, when Clara passed away peacefully at the age of 71 in 1928, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, Jack held her hand and whispered the same words he had spoken on their wedding day. "I love you. I will always love you." She smiled at him, squeezed his hand weakly, and closed her eyes for the last time. Jack followed her 3 years later, at the age of 78, his last words a request to be buried beside Clara. Their graves sat on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, marked by a simple stone that read, "Jack and Clara Obrien. Partners in life, partners in love, together forever," but their legacy lived on. Their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren carried forward the story of how a desperate woman and a wandering cowboy had found each other in a small Arizona town and built something that would endure far beyond their own lifetimes. They told the story of how Jack had called Grace his daughter from the very first day, how he had loved a child who was not his by blood but was absolutely his by choice. And in that story, passed down through generations, was a truth that transcended the specific circumstances of their lives. It was the truth that family is not always about blood, that love is a choice we make every day, and that sometimes the most broken beginnings can lead to the most beautiful endings. It was the truth that hope is never truly lost, that redemption is always possible, and that one act of kindness can change not just a life, but generations of lives to come. The Obrien Ranch continued to operate well into the 20th century, eventually becoming a historical landmark. The old cabin where it had all begun was preserved, and visitors could still see the room where Clara had once rocked baby Grace in desperate loneliness, never knowing that, just beyond the broken window, her future was riding toward her on a chestnut mare. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right through the cottonwoods, people swore they could hear the echo of laughter from the porch, the sound of children playing, and the low murmur of two voices talking together in the peaceful contentment of a love that had outlasted every obstacle placed in its path. It was the sound of a family, of a life well lived, of a promise kept against all odds. It was the sound of home.